Today's presentation is timely because our society is in its most turbulent period in its history. The 15th Amendment, passed in 1870, supposedly gave freedom and voting rights. Of course, it was not until 1965, after years of Jim Crow and all of the other tactics that did not allow blacks to vote. It was 1965 when that Voting Rights Act was passed and Lyndon Johnson signed it. And yet we are here today dealing with voter suppression. We concentrated our efforts in voter registration, but now we're experiencing voter suppression across the country. And so we come today to talk about it, to explore the issues that are so related to it. After these weeks of violence and protest and looting, if that energy is not transformed into voting, and not just the presidential election, but we've got to learn and educate ourselves that the local, the state elections are as important, if not very much the same. And so today we explore it, and we look forward to hearing from the panelists that will be introduced to you and Dr. Pickens, who will moderate this discussion.
Welcome to the Brentwood Voting Forum, hosted by the Jewels of Brentwood. I'm Pamela Sims, Vice President of the Jewels Council. Under the leadership of our pastor, Dr. Joe Samuel Ratliff, we felt that it was important that we engage our church family and our community. We want to answer the question why we should vote, when we should vote, and of course, how we should vote. We want to exercise our civic duty during this election season. We have all been captivated and struggling to make sense of this difficult time of the recent events exposing police brutality, civil unrest, and the feeling of overwhelming grief. We felt that one of the essential ways to give voice to our pain was to vote. Voting gives us power. It helps us to exercise and create change. Our ancestors, they struggled for this right. They protested, and sadly, they even died for this right. So today, we want to say it's imperative to vote, and we must vote as if our lives depend on it. Again, thank you for joining us today. We want to ask that you share this video, ask your other friends and family members to watch. At this time, I'm going to turn the meeting over to our moderator, that is Dr. Carolyn Clay Pickens. She's the Minister of Institutional Advancement and the facilitator for the Brentwood Jewels Council. Dr. Pickens?
Good afternoon, Brentwood family and friends. Thank you, Ms. Sims, for that opening. And we want to thank our pastor, Dr. Ratliff, for that commentary that he gave us. Certainly, voting is significant, and this forum is just so that you will know that we are calling you to the action, really. The act occurred in 1965, as you've already heard, the Voting Rights Act. And now we have an opportunity to be moved to action. We have an insightful and informative panel with us today who are prepared to share and encourage each one of you to take action and to enhance the voter turnout for the 2020 primaries that's coming up in July, and for the actual general election in November. The questions that we will pose to our panel have been collected from a cross-section of individuals of diverse backgrounds, ages, and genders. So the first question we want to start with, and we will have each one of our panelists to answer this question: why do you consider the voting process to be critical, and what have you done to positively influence voter participation? We're going to begin with Ms. Jasmine Turner. Jasmine is a financial analyst, and she's a graduate of Baylor University. She is a former president of the Urban League Young Professionals, and she is a young adult at Brentwood Baptist Church and a millennial. Pam is also a voter advocate, and would you please go ahead and answer our question? What do you consider the why do you consider the voting process to be critical? And what have you done to positively influence voter participation?
Thank you so much, Reverend Pickens, for the opportunity to speak to you all today. I am really excited about voting. I'm an advocate for voting for my short life as an adult, but I'm extremely passionate about it. And one of the reasons why I'm passionate about it is because what I have learned as an adult is that if you are not at the table, then you are on the menu. And when it comes to voting, essentially the table is the voting booth. And if you're not voting for your elected officials who have your best interests at heart, then they're making decisions that that aren't necessarily positive for you and your family and your community. So I think it's just really important that people understand that it's not just about the presidential election. It's not always about who your senator or congressperson is, but it's about who is right here in your community making decisions on things that impact you day in and day out, from your water bill to your trash pickup to the cost of a license for as a barber or nail technicians. All of those things are impacted by elected officials and all of the people who they appoint, people who they recommend for different offices. There are a lot of judges' seats that are appointed, as well as our city chiefs and fire department chiefs. All of those people are, if they're not elected, they're appointed by somebody that is. And if you're not informed and if you're not voting in your interest, then people are making decisions that don't necessarily impact you favorably. And so what I've done in order to just make sure that people are aware of that is I'm very outspoken about voting. Young people, older people, anybody that tells me that voting is not important, I am happy to have a conversation with you about why it is important. And it's basically all the reasons that I just mentioned. So I've done some hit the ground, block walking, and knocking on doors, talking to different voters, going to college fairs and events. I have my voter registration cards with me all the time. I'm a deputy registrar, so I'm always registering people to vote, ask people if they're registered all the time. So a lot of times it's not necessarily about being a part of a larger organization, but it's about, if you have a passion for something, you can always do your individual part by just making sure that people are knowledgeable, what's on the ballot, how they can register to vote, where they need to vote, provide as much information as you can to them, and then hand them that voter registration card to make sure that they sign up and vote.
Excellent. It seems like you've been a busy lady as far as voting goes. So now we're going to move to Alexander V. Sims. Alexander is a Howard University School of Law student. He is a graduate of Morehouse College. He's a summer intern for Fort Bend County DA's office. And he is a student attorney, intellectual property, trademark clinic at Howard University. He's all of that, and he's a member of Brentwood Baptist Church and an Eagle Scout. So I'm going to turn that over to you, Alexander. Why do you consider the voting process to be critical, and what have you done to positively influence the participation in voting?
Okay, well, first of all, I want to say thanks for this opportunity to speak. I'm really excited to see everybody, and I'm hoping that everyone gets a lot from this talk. The question, voting is definitely a very important component on how things can change, or the only way that things can change in this country. And I think as Black people, we need to use every tool in our toolbox to affect positive change and move a society that has been traditionally steeped in racism and white supremacy and move it to a more equitable system that really promotes equity and just equal outcomes, no matter where you grew up, where you're from. And voting is definitely a huge component of that, because the people we vote in affect the laws, affect the people that enforce the laws, and everything that they do is all about voting. So voting in the correct people, making sure that we vote for people that really want to affect positive change and create an equitable system, that's what's really important. Throughout my entire life, I've definitely felt the impacts of voting and wanted to help people understand more about the legislative process and voting in general. So, that goes from speaking about voting in front of people who aren't really familiar, helping people register to vote, volunteering at voting registration drives, doing anything that I can, and on a personal level, just speaking on the importance of voting around the people that I'm around. So, yeah, I think that answers both parts of the question.
Thank you for that. We're going to go to our third panelist, and that's Dr. Alexander Brown. He's a residential historian and civil rights advocate. He began back in Selma, participating in marches even before the Voting Rights Act was signed. So he'll be talking about that a little later, but right now, I want to let you know that he is a graduate of Clark Atlanta with a BS degree and a master's degree in education from Virginia State College and a doctorate of education from Indiana University. His specialization was African American Studies and Counseling. He has worked in counseling and as an African American Studies professor at both the Graduate School of Prairie View, A&M University, and at the University of Houston. He is currently a director of Sunday School at Brentwood, the assistant director of Sunday School, and a civil rights guide for the Brentwood Youth Department. So, Dr. Brown, would you please answer that question also, why you consider the voting process to be critical and what you've done to positively influence voter participation?
Thank you, Dr. Pickens. I'm really excited to be a part of this panel. We've got a wonderful youth. I've watched some of our panelists grow up, and it's really neat to be sitting on this panel with them at this particular time. Being the historian, I want to take a little liberty. 150 years ago, the right to vote was given to the newly freed slaves by the Congress of the United States. It was the 15th Amendment. That was 150 years ago, and let's fast forward through the next 100 years, and in the 1960s, there began to be a movement for equal rights for Black people in this country. And by 1963, we had come up with our goal in the 60s was to change the laws in this country as it related to Black people. And we did. And it was a hallelujah time. So that's the importance, I think, is right there in the fact that over the last 50 years, we are still talking about the same issues that we were fighting for in the 60s. And I've been involved since 1963. And that was 2 years before the Voting Rights Act. You have to understand that 1963, then there was the Birmingham movement. And then we went into Selma, but we were all over the country. 1963, the summer of 63, Medgar Evers was killed. And later that year, JFK, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the President of the United States, was killed. So these were really reactionary times that we were in at that particular time. But young people moved that movement forward. And I'm just so thrilled now because young people are pushing this movement forward. And I'm going to stop there and because I've got some more later.
Yes, you have, Dr. Brown. Thank you. And our final panelist that will speak on that same question is Pamia Jay Gaskin. And she is a managing partner of Think IT Services, LLC. She's a graduate with the BA from the University of Texas at Austin. She completed an executive education at the University of Michigan School of Business. She holds certifications as a certified information systems auditor and Six Sigma Green Belt and information technology infrastructure library specialist. She is a former member of the board of directors of the Houston League of Women Voters, where she's been an active member for 25 years. She's the founding member of the graduate chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority in Missouri City, Texas. And she's also served as president and president of the charitable foundation organized by the chapter. Finally, she's the former member of the Missouri City Board of Construction Adjustments and Appeals and is currently a member of the board of directors of the Fort Bend Central Appraisal District. With all that said, we call her our Brentwood in-house expert on voting. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Sister Gaskin. Why do you consider the voting process to be critical, and what have you done to positively influence voter participation?
Well, thank you so much, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak at any time about voting. It is my passion. Why do I consider it to be critical? Because on election day, that is the only day in America that everyone is equal. Everybody only has one vote to cast. Be you a millionaire or a bum. Be you black, white, Asian American, Latinx, we each have one vote. We are all equal. And if we don't cast that precious vote, which is called a franchise, if we don't cast that vote, then you are allowing someone to make decisions for you. As Jasmine said earlier, if you don't vote, if you are not at the table, you're on the menu. And we have seen over these last few weeks in America, and Dr. Brown and I have seen over the last 60 years, exactly how we get devoured. So voting is critical because it is your citizenship right, is your first right as a citizen. What have I done? I have registered voters. I'm a deputized registrar in 2 counties. I, like Jasmine, take my voting stuff with me all the time. It's in the trunk of the car or in my bag, and I will ask people in the grocery store, are you registered to vote? And if they're not, I will sign them up right then. A friend of mine said I would register your shoelaces to vote if shoelaces could vote. So that's just that's what I've done to affect things positively. And I'm just happy to have this opportunity to speak with folks. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gaskin. But we're going to ask you another question. Since you talk about registering people, talk with us about the voter registration process for the general population and for special populations that are privy to the process.
Okay. I want to share my screen here. Okay. registration is pretty simple. The deadline has passed to register to vote in the primary that's coming up. The primary runoff is coming up on July 14th. But the last day to register to vote for the upcoming November election is Monday, October 5th. Jasmine and I would be happy to register you at any time for that if you are not registered. I particularly want to, if you know of young people who have just graduated from high school, please do everything you can to make sure that they are registered to vote. How do you vote? Well, how do you register to vote? You can register to vote. I'm going to change my thing there. The easiest way to register to vote, go to vote411.org as you see on the screen. Click on register to vote, complete the form, print it out, and mail it. Or you can go to your county's voter registrar office. In most counties, it's either it's in the tax assessor collector's office, or which it is in Harris County. In Fort Bend County, we have a voting administrator's office, and it's located in Rosenberg, Texas. And you can go there and register. But the easiest way, I tell folks, go to vote411.org, click on register to vote, complete the form, print it, and mail it. Special populations, such as inmates, we have a wonderful program called #ProjectOrange. It's a program of Houston Justice, and it works closely with the Harris County Jail to register eligible inmates. What most people don't know is if you have not been convicted of a felony, you can vote. A lot of people are in jail on misdemeanors because they can't pay the bonding. Those folks have a right to vote. This year, before COVID-19, we were able to register over 2,500 inmates in just January and February. So we're doing that. And also for those who have completed their parole, who have been convicted of a felony, but have completed their parole and they're off what they call off paper, their right to vote is restored in Texas. All they have to do is register to vote. So if you know anyone in that circumstance, absolutely get them to register to vote. Thank you.
Excellent. There are many populations that probably aren't taking advantage of this right. So as Ms. Gaskin invited you to do, look around, whether it's a neighbor or actually a family member or a friend. Just ask them if they are registered to vote, and then you can take it from there. Whether they say yes or no, congratulate them or inform them. Dr. Brown, in March 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. led marches, as you've already said, in Selma, and you were a part of that. And all of this was done to dramatize the voting issue. Selma had a record of using violence to prevent African Americans from voting. Shortly after the marches, President Johnson signed that voting rights bill in Congress to remove race-based restrictions. Based on that fact, and the fact that you were involved prior to the signing of this act, how did seeing the fruit of your labor become a reality impact you as a young Black man?
Well, again, the year before, we had just gotten the Civil Rights Bill passed. So that was just euphoria in the community. We declared we had won. But Dr. King said, no, there's still work to be done. We need to get a voting rights bill done. So for the next 2 years, we were in the streets, in the woods, in the churches, late at night, but we were helping people get ready to vote. And we continued to do that. And so when the voting rights bill was passed, it was just God is on our side. We have overcome. Now, we were young. I was a youngster then, so I realize now that we hadn't really overcome. But for us, mission-based, when you see the president, we have one president from Texas who signed both of those bills into law. So we just knew we were at Pentecost. Everybody was on the same page. We were doing wonderful things. But here we are 50 years later, still dealing with the same issues. They just look a little different, but they're the same issues.
Thank you. Thank you. You made it very real. Now I want to ask this next question to both of our millennials on the panel, Alexander Sims and Jasmine Turner. When did you register to vote? And I think, well, I'll just let you say it again if you said it before. And what stands out about this experience? Now that's the first part of the question. The second part is, tell us about your first time voting and point out any challenges or roadblocks that might have occurred at that time, whether you were in college on a university campus or whether you were just in the city and it was after college. And I'm going to say Jasmine Turner go first because she's
ladies first.
a lady and he is a gentleman.
Well, I appreciate that. So I'm going to make the assumption that I registered to vote when I turned 18. I didn't turn 18 in high school, so I'm going to assume that I did it sometime in college, maybe my freshman year. But I remember the first time I voted because the first time I voted was in 2008 during the primary election, actually. Before Barack Obama was our nominee, I voted in that primary, which I learned about primaries at the same time I was voting in one. So that was a learning experience as well. And then in November of that year, had another opportunity to vote for in the general election for our first Black president. And I went to the same polling location that I voted in March. And I waited in line and I got up to the front and they told me that you're not at the right place. And I was very frazzled. This is before, I guess we had the internet on our phones back then too, but it was not the same as now where you can just like look something up really quick. So I had to get the address, look the address up, find out where to go. And at this point it was getting pretty late. I did not early vote. I waited until the late afternoon, early evening to cast my ballot. And so I ended up with a couple of my friends somewhere in the woods in Waco at a fire station voting for Barack Obama. And it was kind of intimidating because at that point it was dark and we were the only people that looked like us at the polling location. And I'm going to say that they were nice people. I just know that I was scared because when you're the only other in a room and you're in the woods, sometimes, you're not quite sure what people have, what their intentions are. And then with this being such a pivotal election, it was exciting, but it was also a little bit nerve-wracking. We made it out safely back to campus. But the interesting thing about that is half the campus had to go to that location, or some people who were on the outskirts of campus had to vote in that location, but most people were actually able to vote at a more populous area of the town. So it was really weird that my polling location ended up that far off. So what I learned from that experience are a couple things. Early voting is important because if you get turned away or you have some type of issue, a lot of times you'll still be able to fill out your ballot and you have to sign like an affidavit or some type of document, but that vote may not be counted for days or weeks, depending on the type of election it is or how close the election is. and God forbid it may not even be counted at all. So you want to vote early, just so you don't have to deal with any of those issues, and you know where your polling location is. That's the other thing. You have a lot of resources. Ms. Gaskin mentioned 411.org as a resource. You can also go to harrisvotes.com if you're in Harris County, just so you know where your polling location is for early voting and for the day of the election. If I had done some research before, I wouldn't have gotten that turned around on election day, but I have a story to tell now that I was able to vote for Barack Obama 2008 in the woods.
All right, thank you. Mr. Sims, would you like to share?
Sure. It's a good story too, Jazz. So, for me, I would turn to 18 when I was in high school. And so in Texas, I don't know if they still do this. Whenever you renew your 16-year-old driver's license to when you turn 18, they automatically register you to vote. So I was registered to vote in Texas right off the bat. So if you're 18 and you have a driver's license, you probably are registered to vote. You just have to check your status. I registered to vote in Georgia when I was in college, though. It was my sophomore year, but like 2016, right before the deadline for the general election. And it took me like 20 minutes. I had to find the place. I had to pay for parking, though. That kind of sucked. But yeah, I walked in the place. They got me in and out pretty quickly. And then the first time I voted was the 2016 election. On election day, I didn't vote early, but I woke up, like the polls on campus opened up at like 7 a.m. and I woke up at 6. I was wired. I was so excited. And I got there. There was no line. Nobody was in there. And I got in and out pretty quick. So I was like, okay, I know, like if I wake up early for this location, I'll be good. But there were no hardships in that time. That voting process, the only hardship was like the result of the election. That really messed with me for a long time. But fast forward to a couple years later, my senior year, I voted in the governor's election in Georgia because I wanted Stacey Abrams to win. So once again, I woke up early at like 6. I got there right at 7. There was nobody there. Like I was the first person in line, voted really quickly. But you might have heard about this in the news that a lot of places in Georgia were not prepared for this election. And so there was a lot of like voter suppression, honestly. It was plain voter suppression, how some places didn't have the right machines, didn't have the right equipment for people to vote. And there were areas where people would have voted for Stacey Abrams. And a lot of my classmates definitely had to deal with that. So voter suppression is definitely still a thing that exists, unfortunately. And it's something that we have to change in our society. So those are my stories.
I should have thanked both of you, Alexander and Jasmine, for those stories about what you've run into when voting. And I hope that gives somebody out there an insight, especially people who may be about to vote for the first time. You don't know what to expect, so that you might be prepared. And just as a disclaimer, we are not telling you who to vote for. Our panelists did share, and we're happy to hear what they have to share. But we are not telling you who to vote for. We're only simply saying, please vote your consciousness. The next question that we have is for Pamia Gaskin. Please talk with us about describe to us the process of making an application for a ballot to vote by mail. We're hearing a lot about voting by mail and various nuances that we might incur when we employ this process. So please give us some insight.
Be happy to. In this season of COVID-19, when we've seen long lines in Wisconsin, we've seen long lines in Georgia, people are not really social distancing. An alternative is to vote by mail, ballot by mail. Now, in Texas, there are only four groups that can vote by mail, the ballot by mail. If you're 65 or over, if you're in prison, if you're going to be out of the county where you live for during the early voting period and on election day. It's not either or, it's all. You have to be out of the county for the entire early voting period and election day. And the fourth category of folks that can vote by mail are people who are disabled. Now, you may have heard some things about lawsuits that were filed, and that one of the parties in Texas did file a lawsuit saying that, you know, people who feared that they might contact COVID-19, that that's a disability. Well, the courts have ruled no, it's not a disability. So we're bound by the four, and the Attorney General of the state of Texas has also said that if anyone advises someone to submit a ballot by mail and claiming that as a disability, which I don't really think you have to say what your disability is, but he's saying anyone who does that can be subject to fines, penalties, and going to jail. So right now, I'm telling you there are four categories of people that can vote by mail. And since the over 65 population is one of the populations that is at risk for COVID-19, it's a good idea to vote by mail. Now, you have to apply, you have to file an application for a ballot by mail. And you can do that online. You can do that at vote411.org. Or a lot of times the parties, both Republican and Democratic, will send you things in the mail where you can send in your application. So you apply, you have to sign, and then the county will send you your ballot by mail. I've talked to several friends of mine who have already received their ballots by mail for this upcoming election in July. Here's some questions that you may want to know. Once I voted this ballot by mail, what do I do with it? Well, what you do with it is you mail it in as soon as possible. Do not wait until the last day. I'm going to share my screen and show you what the send it in as soon as possible. The latest that your county can receive your ballot is 7 p.m. on election day. If it's not in it, that's if you bring it in to the county election office. You cannot turn in a voted ballot by mail at a polling place. The only place you can turn in on any day a voted ballot in person is at the county election office. So remember that, and remember to put postage on the envelope. That this is not one of those where no postage is required. You have to put postage on the envelope. And remember to sign the back of the envelope, because what they do is they match your signature. They match the signature from your application to the signature on the back of your ballot. And if those signatures, and there's a ballot board, I'm not going to go into all of it, but it's a subject for another day. But there's a group of people from both parties that sit and compare these signatures. So I will just tell you this: in Fort Bend County in the 2018 election, over 300 ballots by mail were thrown out because of signature mismatches. So please, make sure that your signature matches. And if you have a problem doing that, I would suggest that you take a risk and go vote in person, because they are going to match the signatures. And they have to be, They don't have to be exactly correct, but they have to be what they call substantially correct. People always want to know, once my ballot is mailed in, what happens? How can I track it? Well, you really can't track it. The county tracks it, but you can't log on somewhere and see that, oh, my ballot is now sitting at the county office and waiting to be counted. And another one, is there a recourse if your mail-in ballot is returned to sender? Comes back to you following the election date. That probably is a rare occurrence because I don't know if you can see it, but the address for where it goes is pre-stamped on the envelope. So that really doesn't happen. But to turn in your ballot by mail, if you want to turn it in, remember, the only place you can turn in a voted ballot by mail is at the county election office, which in Houston is at one of the tax assessor collector's office, because the tax assessor collector is also the voter registrar, or the county clerk's office. I think the county clerk's office too. And in Fort Bend County, you have to turn it into the election office. And in Brazoria County, I know you have to turn it in to the tax assessor's office. So just remember, guard that with your life. And I did inquire, because I had always been told that you have to turn in an unopened ballot if you change your mind. Say you're sitting there and it's the early voting period, and you say, I see the lines are not that long. I want to go vote in person, but I have this mail-in ballot. What do I do? Take that ballot with you to the polling place. Give it to the election judge. The election judge will call the county. They will look at the barcode, and they will cancel that out and then allow you to vote in person. So, and you can have opened it. I always thought you had to bring an unopened ballot, but it's not true. You can they told me you can have opened it, but if you decide you want to vote in person, just turn it in. They'll scan it and take you out of the system as having received the ballot by mail. So that's that.
That's a lot of good information to have, very pertinent. And the one thing, though, I'd like to ask you is not about the vote by mail, but it is about a ballot, and that's the provisional ballot. We don't want them to get confused and wonder how is that tied in. So could you tell them a little about the provisional ballot?
Yes. Let's say that you go to vote and you are not, for some reason, on the roll, and that is the only reason that you will be given a provisional ballot. But you could have a voter registration card, but for some reason you are not on the official roll. When they check you in, they will give you what is called a provisional ballot. You vote that ballot, it goes in a separate place, and within 6 days, it has to be cured. Whatever the deficiency is, has to be cured. And once, and you, the voter, are responsible for following up on this to make sure that they have your voter information in the system. And then that ballot will be counted. But if it's not cured in 6 days after the election, that provisional ballot gets thrown out. So, and let me tell you, there's some things that people do. My daughter went to vote, and a woman told her she couldn't vote because her license had expired. And she said, no, it hasn't. And this was an election worker in Harris County. And she says, oh, yes, yes, it has, because your expiration date is in red. And the Morgan asked for the election judge to come. And the election judge said, no, this license is not expired. And she says, well, it's in red. And, you know, Morgan just looked, she said, everybody's expiration date is in red. How many people who look like me have you told this to? And so you have to really, and that woman was taken off of you know, her post. But just know your rights when you go. You can take a driver license that has been expired up to 4 years, as long as it has your picture on it. You can take a passport. So just remember, and to know your rights, and know that just because your expiration date is in red does not mean that your license
Excellent.
is expired.
Thank you for those details, because we got to get our votes counted. And if it takes everybody sharing this information, so
Yes,
you're
we
getting
do.
it today so you can share it and pass it on to those in your family or in your community. Dr. Brown, you heard it a little while ago from Ms. Turner about what could have prevented some of those long lines. And so we're going to ask you a little about that today. And also from Mr. Sims about it could also prevent voter suppression. And what I'm talking about is early voting. So could you tell us a little bit more about early voting and how it can, some input you might can give us regarding early voting?
Dr. Pickens, I'll be happy to do that. But before I get into that, I have a little story that I want to just interject, because for many years, all of my life voting up until the 2008 election, I always voted. I never got to vote for a candidate. I always voted against the candidate. And, you know, because you were voting for the lesser. For me, I was voting for the less. There were two evils, and I was voting for the one that was lesser. And pretty much my choices for this coming election is pretty much the same. But what I want to say to the Brentwood family and to all of the people who are listening, don't get caught up in all this betting now of the candidates. We know who we want to vote for. We know why there are people that we don't want to vote for, and we know why we don't want to vote for them. So at this point, whatever the problem that you might have, our candidate said this, and they did this 20 years ago or 30 years ago. At this point, I promise you, I'm ready to vote for Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck or whomever in this particular election. And one more thing, I declare, we had more than 20 Democrats running for the nomination. And I declared early on, well, finally, I don't have to vote. And you can edit this out if you want to, but I don't have to vote for an old white man. But here we are again, having to do the same thing that I declared I didn't want to do. But now I feel compelled that I got to vote for an old white man. But now you asked me about early voting. It's so important. Early voting, you can get up and get there like Alexander found out early on, get there early and get it done, be the first in line. But you can go anywhere you see a voting sign in Harris County, you can go and vote during early voting. So go and get it done. Now, the only thing about me, the problem with voting in the primary was that the person I voted for in the primary the person I voted for wasn't around at the end, so I was just sort of a wasted vote there. But vote. Okay? Brentwood family vote, and Brentwood family get everybody in your family, everybody you know, all your work partners, everybody you know that's not a voter, encourage them to get out and vote in this election. And all the talk about the electoral college when it comes to voting for the president, that, don't get caught up in that, because the electoral college does not control who the mayor is, who the governor is, who your city council people are, who your county commissioners are. So go and vote. That's it.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. And just for your information, if you're wondering when the early voting is leading up to the primaries, it begins on June the 29th and runs through the 10th of July, with the July 3rd and July 4th being holidays. So no voting those 2 days, but that's your early voting. You go first, Mr. Sims. Often, because we see much of it here lately, the protesting and voting goes hand in hand. And so my question to you is, what is your expected outcome from protests, some of the protests that have been going on?
Well, it's a great question, honestly. And the first thing I mentioned when I started speaking today was, as Black people, we have to use every tool in our toolbox, and protesting is arguably the most important tool, right? Protesting and voting hand in hand. And I think protesting is so important because if you continue to put pressure and make people reevaluate what's wrong with our society, the things that we've been conditioned to accept just because that's just the way the country is, if we continue to challenge the values of things that are wrong by protesting, by putting pressure on corporations, our elected officials, and the people around us in our interpersonal lives, protesting can really get a lot done. And we've seen that happen just within the past few weeks of how much has changed just from this short time of protesting. So the important thing is making sure that our voices are not silenced and that the protests don't lose steam, because this is how our voices are going to be heard. And we're forcing this society that has refused to listen to us. So I think that's the most important outcome of the protest, just making people reevaluate things that are not right about our society and putting pressure on the people that can change that.
And we can see that a lot of people are buying into that as we watch the news and watch the world, not only in America, but globally. So thank you for that. I'll remind each one of you about the original protests that came back in the 60s, led by Martin Luther King. They were all nonviolent, well, on the side of the protesters. On the side of the police and other people, there was a lot of violence toward the protesters. So today, we protest, and I want to go on record as saying that you have to be careful, though, when you watch how the transition from the protesting and with the message, and then a lot of the looting and burning. Sometimes those aren't the same factions that were protesting in the day. There are extreme right and extreme left groups that come in, and now some of them even dress up to pretend to be the other faction. So we have to be careful and just stay true to who we are and represent what we are asking for when we protest. And I have to say, I think nonviolence is still the proper way to go, because in the end, God has our back, and I believe that. But thank you so much. We do appreciate your input. We're going to use this as our wrap-up question, and we're going to take it to Ms. Gaskin. And I want to say, there was one more question I was going to ask, but Ms. Turner included it in another one, and that was regarding preparation, making preparation. Was there anything you did not add before, Jasmine, when you talked about how to prepare to be informed to vote?
I think we all kind of touched on it a little bit. The only thing I would add is the sample ballot.
Okay,
looking up the
okay.
ballot prior to voting. So, did you want me to just expand on that, or did you want to go back?
You can, you can,
Okay.
you can.
So, yes, sample ballots are your best friend. I am a planner most of the time, or at least a part-time planner. But when it comes to voting, I am always prepared, especially after my first experience, and also now learning more about what's at stake and understanding all of the positions that are on the ballot every election year. So I always either print out a ballot or find it online, and I'll go through every single race one by one, all the way down to all the judges. It's usually a 2 to 3 day process for me because I do my due diligence. I know that's not everybody's thing, but it takes me a couple days to get through it. I make my choices, and you can actually take your sample ballot into the voting booth. Ms. Gaskin will correct me if I am wrong on that, but you can take it into the election booth with you, and you can use that, and it makes your voting process go a lot faster. Instead of you kind of guessing and picking who, like, you can just go through your list, make your choices, and then you can walk out. And then that also made me think about one last thing about the voting straight ticket. I didn't know if Ms. Gaskin was going to touch on that in your question with her. No.
Okay, I can ask her too, because
Okay.
so thank you for that.
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
But that was the preparation part.
All right, thank you very much.
Editing this.
The last question that we're going to kind of merge those two, Ms. Gaskin, if you would include what about the straight ticket, and
Okay.
in voting, we would like to ask you about a new voting system that you encountered in your county, Fort Bend, and tell us about that and how it improves the voting process.
Well, we're not going to know if it improves the process until after we go through it, okay?
Okay.
But to address the straight ticket voting, it used to be in Texas, you could, if you didn't want to vote the entire ballot up and down, you could say, I'm going to vote for all the Democrats. I'm going to do a straight party Democrat. I'm going to do a straight party Republican. You cannot do that any longer. And not only that, the candidates do not have D's or R's behind their names. So it is very important for you to, again, as Jasmine said, prepare yourself. Vote411.org. This is my go-to for everything. You can get your sample ballot at vote411.org. But more importantly, you can go on there and you can click on each candidate and it will give you their name, their education background, why they're running for office, what they think are the important issues. And so you can look at that, and if you pick out the person that agrees with you, with where you stand. But you can go to vote411.org and get a sample ballot. You can also go to harrisvotes.org and get a sample ballot. Now, if you do that, you're not going to get all the information about the candidate. In October, around a week before early voting, the League of Women Voters will put out their voter guide. What they do is ask every candidate that's running for an office the same question. So everybody who's running for senator will get the same questions. Everybody who's running for municipal judge will get the same question. And also, one of the things that I like to do is I like to see who doesn't respond to the League of Women Voters, because that kind of tells me if you're not going to take time to answer 3 questions, how are you going to handle the business that's important to me? So, and these candidates know. And the other thing is the League of Women Voters does not alter, correct, or edit any questions, any answers. If you misspelled all the words, it's going in the voter guide with misspelled words. If your subjects and verbs don't agree, going in like that. If you misuse words, it's going in like that. So that also will tell you a little something about the candidates. So, and before I answer your next question, I have breaking news to share with you. Remember I told you that there was a lawsuit and the Fifth Circuit Court said we couldn't, everybody couldn't vote by mail. Today, the United States Supreme Court was petitioned by the Texas Democratic Party that said it is a violation of the 26th Amendment of the Constitution to abridge the right to vote based on age, that Texas allows those 65 and older to vote by mail. And the petition is asking for the entire Supreme Court to rule on this. So that was just filed this afternoon. So you're getting breaking news, June 16th. Now, Carolyn, Dr. Pickens, there was a second part to that question and I forgot what it was.
The second part was with regard to Fort Bend's new voting machines.
Yes,
And let me just say, Commissioner Grady Prestidge, who is a member of Brentwood, was part of that decision to implement those.
Right.
So,
and that's the other thing. This is why it's important to vote that down ballot, because Commissioner's Court, they're the ones that make all the decisions about things in the county. They hire the elections administrator. They fix your roads. They fix your bridges. They do commissioners. It's probably the most powerful job in the state of Texas. It's really pretty much more powerful than the governor. So commissioners make a lot of decisions about your life and what happens. If you go to Fort Bend Votes, fortbendvotes.com, and you'll get that landing page, and if you scroll down, you'll see a screen with a video. It has the new ESS, it's a video on the new ESS system. This new system in Fort Bend County is a 4-part voting. You will go in, you will check in, you will be handed a form, like a Scantron, and you will take it over to the voting machine. You will insert it in the voting machine. Then you will electronically make your selections. Then you will say you're finished, and it'll come out. And then you have to go over to another machine to scan your vote, your piece of paper. Here's the issue. If you walk out of that polling place with that piece of paper, you cannot come back in and cast your vote. So you must make sure that you complete all 4 steps. You receive the Scantron, you insert it in, you vote, you take it out, and you go put it in the other machine. Now, the final machine is a counting machine, and it supposedly is supposed to be for safety and security. It is not connected to the internet. So it's a counter. So we're gonna see, they're testing it out. Well, actually not testing it, they've made a decision that we're gonna use it. So I'm encouraging everybody, please go vote in this runoff election. Because for several reasons. One, because we should all vote every time the polls open. It doesn't matter what we're voting for. We should vote every time. We should be in the habit of voting, but also to help prepare you for the November election. And if I might say one more thing, if you have children at home who are too young to vote, take them with you. Let them see you voting. Model good citizenship for your children, because that's how they will grow up and become voters. So that's my little thought for the day.
Well, thank you for that thought. It was a necessary one, and it is. I want to say that I hope you have been inspired and that you've heard something today that will lead you to share this forum with someone you know who maybe will be voting for the first time, or someone who needs to be updated on all of these nuances about voting. And in particular, at a time like this, when the whole primary was changed from May until July. So we have we're living in a different time, but we need you to still reach out and be an advocate for our right to vote. And if you need more information, you've had all kinds today, but still, if something was left out, and if we can steer you to where you can get some additional information that you may need, you feel free to email me, cpickens@brentwoodbaptist.org, and I will pass it on or get it from some of these people and get you some information back that might help you. We will respond to you. Now hear from our pastor, Dr. Joe Samuel Ratliff, as he offers us his closing remarks.
I know you are excited. I know you are excited for this discussion. It has been stimulating, it's been educational, and now we must get out and vote. Thank you for watching this discussion with us today.